Hi, my name is Chris Fowler, and I'm one of the members here at Desert Grace. We have a great message for you today. If you enjoy this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up and leave a comment so we know that you've been here and been blessed. Thank you and God bless.
The Bible, somebody speaking a curse is most likely trying to wish for God's judgment, but not God's positive affirmative judgment, but most likely for God to give a negative judgment upon somebody else, right? So when we use the word curse, we use it in so many different ways. It becomes almost difficult to really kind of nail it down and define it. We have curse words. We have all kinds of other things that go on. And there's a few things that we just really keep going on with. But basically in the Bible, it's trying to be negative in so many ways. This might sound a little weird, but a curse could be hope. You ever thought about that? If you want to curse somebody and you're saying, hey, I curse that person, your hope is that misery will be brought on that person, or perhaps they will meet their untimely end, right? Some of you are sitting there a little uncomfortably going, he knew about that. I didn't think he knew. But it's reality. It's something that occurs. To curse something, someone, a group of people is definitely not to wish it the very best, right? Now, I want to bring this up because today's passage is going to talk a little bit about cursing and blessing, and there's a couple of things that we need to really be thinking through. But we know that cursing wouldn't be a positive thing. It's basically trying to get God's negative judgment, and when you're using it in the Bible. Now, here's the thing. We don't normally issue curses to our friends. When we're getting along, when everything is good, we don't start going, hey, listen, you're my best friend. I hope that you're cursed. May God's negative judgment be upon you. We only do it to people who we see as an enemy. And by the way, I want to kind of point something out here, that we tend to see people as an enemy fairly quickly. And when we do, we often see people not as human, but as something else. Just kind of wanted to make sure you get that and understand that. So, perhaps part of the reason why curses occur is a peaceful settlement of disputes. Because after all, if I'm not able to just absolutely fight with my own hand, I'll just ask God to do the fighting for me, and if God will curse you, you have a worse thing coming than I could ever do anyway. Right? Would you agree with that? Amen. Would you think that that's something that absolutely could happen? Did you know that technology sometimes is cursed? King David finds himself in the middle of an absolutely cursed situation, and he's going to respond in a very specific way. So my question for us today is this. Which traits from David's character should modern-day Christians adopt? Now, when we talk about character traits, there's a thing about character that goes into the most deep part of who we are. Character isn't the how we can act or pretend for a period of time. Character is actually what happens when the pressure is absolutely on. What do you do then? And so David is in the midst of a situation in which the character is being pressed out of him, so to speak. And my question for us today is, what of those things should we really be paying attention to? Now, I want you to keep in mind as we go through this particular passage that David is described as a man after God's own heart. He's never lost that title. He's never lost that position. He's never become something that like not quite God's heart anymore. God never says he's left me, for lack of a better way of saying it. So David goes out and he has all of these incredible successes. We could recount them all, but we could start with David and Goliath, and then we could just talk about the Philistines over and over and over again, right? Until finally he becomes king, and then he seems to have a string of failures that immediately follows him as well. So first you have all these successes, now you end up with all of these failures, and so what do you do next? He's in a situation where Absalom has claimed kingship. Absalom has said, I now am the king, Absalom being David's own son, and David is now fleeing Jerusalem. He is gone, he's trying to get away and be in search of safety. And last week, if you were with us, that's when I said, oh, by the way, this is the end of today's episode. Now, David is in a battle unlike he has ever seen before. Before, David's battles were generally just doing what God wants him to do, just going out with a slingshot and a rock, or going out onto the battlefield. You notice how they never really discuss much how David actually fights. It seems like his mere presence, the Philistines just go, ooh, fall over, because he's fighting on God's behalf. Now he's fighting a more human type of battle. Have you noticed that? It's a battle over standing and seeing someone beautiful and then desiring that person not as a person but as an object. It's about seeing power and others seeing power and wanting to take it. It's about family and David maybe not quite being the father he should have been. But even in the midst of all of that, he still remains a wise and godly king and leader. Now, I want to make sure we understand this, and there's some parts of the story that I hope you remember, but I want to just give us some quick reminders. The first thing being that in the last time we were together and David leaves, he had left with the priests and he had left with the ark of God, which is considered where God's very presence was. That was taken out when they'd go out into battle, because for a time it seemed like if you were going to be successful, why wouldn't you take God with you? And now David says, look, I'm going to send that back to Jerusalem. That's where it rightly belongs. And you priests go back to Jerusalem anywhere. But David's not saying, look, I don't need God's presence anymore. He's kind of come to terms with the fact that, by the way, we should keep this in mind, God can bless you from anywhere. He is not limited to a particular place or a particular time. You know, we talk about the church all the time. You can walk in here on Sunday morning and you can feel God's presence. It's palpable. If you don't feel it, you got to start paying attention when you walk in. Because you all bring him in here. Amen. Now, if you come in, I don't know, at midnight tonight when there's absolutely nobody here and everything's dark, do you think God's here waiting for you? Yeah. Maybe. But do you think you're going to get the same presence as you would when everybody is gathered together worshiping him? The special thing isn't the room. The special thing is you. I want to make sure you get that straight. David seems to be starting to get that. David sends the priests back, and by the way, it seems like he's sending the priests back for a lot of other reasons, but part of what he's doing is he's sending back people who are going to be insiders. You see, David hasn't lost sight of actual reality. David realizes what's going to go on here, and one of the things that he does is he sends the priests back, and they can bring messages to him through the priest's sons. So now he has an inside track. That's part of the battle that he's facing. The other thing is you might remember a little bit if you've read through this before, Hushai the Archite, who was a wise person. David, he goes to David and says, look, I really want to follow you. I want to be with you wherever you are because I know that that's where God is. And David says, look, here's what I need you to do. I want you to go back. I want you to go to Absalom, and I want you to tell Absalom, now that you're the king, I will serve you just like I served your father. And so then, whenever Ahithophel, which used to be David's counselor and trusted advisor, gives advice, Hushai the Archite is there to kind of mess it up. We're going to see that in the future. Next episode, stay tuned. Next week, same station, same time. As David continues exile from Jerusalem, he encounters Ziba, who is bearing gifts. Now, if you've been with us over the course of this entire series, you may remember Ziba. Ziba was a servant of Saul who then becomes David's appointed servant to Jonathan's son. There was a point in time where David says, listen, I want to show some favor to someone in Saul's household. Who is left? And they said, well, there's Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. He's lame, so he can't walk, but he's still here. He's still around. He's somebody who you could possibly do. And so David says, I want to show Mephibosheth some love and some honor for Saul's sake and for Jonathan's sake. And so he brings him into Jerusalem, allows him to eat at the king's table, and sends Ziba to take care of everything. So now we're in the midst of a war. And who shows up or who appears on the scene as David is fleeing but Ziba, who happens to be bearing gifts. Now, it says that the gifts included a string of donkeys saddled and loaded. And it describes a whole bunch of things. Like it says something like 200 loaves of bread. We're talking about a lot of food to take care of David's people. There's raisin cakes, like 100 of them, and 100 of fig cakes. Are you getting ready for lunch yet? There would be more than enough to go around if these were a gift to us today. So David sees this scene, and he does what any reasonable person would do. He says, why on earth have you brought me these gifts? And Ziba kind of answers with, well, the donkeys are for you all to ride on. That's why they're saddled and ready for you to go, so that you can get on and not have to walk the rest of the way. And the food is obviously for you to eat. And I've brought along some wine so that when you really get down and depressed and tired, you can then be pepped up a little bit with the wine. You see, Ziba doesn't really answer the question. He doesn't really say why he brought the gifts, just kind of like, well, duh, these are for you to use. His inquiry as to where on earth is Mephibosheth, there's a question among scholars who have debated probably for centuries over whether or not Ziba tells a little lie here. Because ultimately what he says is that your servant, your Mephibosheth, has stayed back in Jerusalem because since he is part of the family of Saul and Absalom has ties to that side, he is really excited that Saul's kingdom is now going to be restored. And so he stayed behind. Now, just so that you and I are all on the same page, later Mephibosheth's going to say, yep, that didn't happen at all. Don't know what happened there, but it didn't happen. In fact, he's going to come out later on and he's going to have not shaved the whole time David was gone or taken care of his things like fingernails or whatever. That's just, he's going to look like he's been mourning that entire time. And so he's going to deny it. But because Ziba brings all these gifts, and because Ziba says, my servant Mephibosheth, or the servant of who I am, my steward, stayed back in Jerusalem, David goes, all right, well, you can have all his stuff. It's now yours. The narrative never really tells us whether Ziba is truly an ally with David. Now, I want you to understand this from a couple of different perspectives. And it's really important as we get ready to go into today's passage. So I want you to kind of get the mood in your head. Imagine that you are with David or that you are David. You have, in the last several hours or maybe a few days, have discovered that one of your sons is taking over as the king and is on his way to your city, to your palace, and you can only imagine he's already killed one of his brothers. What is he going to do to you? So, knowing that the best thing to do for right now is to just go ahead and leave because we don't know who's on whose side, you have been running and you are trying to get away, and you've come across some people and you've sent back some trusted advisors. And you run into Ziba, who seems to be on your side and to be in your corner by bringing you all these donkeys that you can ride on and also all of this food that you can eat. But you're really not sure whose side he's on. That's where we begin today's story, 2 Samuel chapter 16, starting at verse 5. We'll read through verse 14. As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and special guards were on David's right and David's left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he's cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, who can ask, why do you do this? David then said to Abishai and all his officials, my son, my own flesh and blood, is trying to kill me. How much more then this Benjamite? Leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of his curse today. So David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. If David has been having this really, really bad day in which Ziba began to become sort of a bright spot in it, with all of his gifts, because at least now we can eat, now we have supplies, now we have some donkeys so that we don't have to walk the entire way, then just almost as quickly as he gets his day brightened, it is ruined again. I don't know about you, but Shimei is not being very friendly here. He's not being very encouraging other than to get out. Keep walking, do the thing that you are supposed to be doing. I'm not exactly sure how I would feel if I was David or if I was somebody along with him. This has been a weird day. It's been a horrible time. I'm not even sure what to do with myself. There's probably not a whole lot of small talk that goes on when you're fleeing the palace, right? So, when we get back, or if we get back, what do you think about some new curtains? I was thinking about maybe redoing the floor in the master. My guess is that they're walking out shamed, humiliated. And in case they didn't already know it, here comes Shimei telling them to get out and keep going. In fact, the way the Bible words this, Shimei is basically unrelenting with just continuing to curse David, to continue to throw assaults at him, to continue to throw dirt and rocks and all of these sorts of things. And just David saying, look, if God told him to do this, then who am I to tell him to stop? I'm a little confused by this, to be quite honest, and I don't know about you. You have this guy who just continually, now we don't know exactly how far he followed them, but if it was just over the ridge and all the way to the Jordan, that would be quite a distance. We're not talking about maybe a mile or two. This is a long time that he's going on and just making a pest out of himself. But he's saying things like David is a scoundrel. He's been really clear that he thinks that David has stolen the kingdom from Saul and from Saul's household. There's no question about that. He calls David a murderer. And while David may not have been directly involved in those murders, it doesn't really matter. He's throwing rocks and dirt, so in case you could ignore somebody who's just yelling off in the distance, it's hard to ignore somebody when they keep hitting you with rocks and dirt. Don't know if that's ever happened to you. I wouldn't want it to. Shammai feels very justified. He sees this entire thing as David's rightful punishment. And he's just heaping it on. You see, to a certain extent, you got to wonder a little bit about a guy who's so excited David's getting his punishment, who feels like he needs to keep going on and on and on, and not just let God do what he thinks God is doing. So let's talk a little bit about Abishai. Abishai talks about, let's just take off this dead dog's head. We talked a little bit in the past about what dead dog means. What dead dog means, for one, dogs were not considered man's best friend, right? They were considered a nuisance. They were just kind of all over the place. And so a dog is useless, and a dog that's dead is useless on top of useless, right? And so what Abishai is basically saying is that man over there that's up on the hill, throwing rocks, hurling insults, calling all of these things, is a worthless man. So let me go give him his due and shut him up. Now the scripture doesn't tell us. He could have been listening to Shammai for about 4 hours by now, or it could have been 4 minutes. But have you ever been annoyed by somebody saying something repeatedly? If you have kids, you have. If you've been near kids, you have. If you've been a kid, you've done it to somebody else. And there comes a point where you're just like, just be quiet. We can't cut our kids' heads off, though. That's not okay. See, this is not just an offense to David. It's not limited to David. He's traveling with a lot of people who are now hearing them. Hey, look, David, you're getting what you deserve. And you know what? When somebody you love is being attacked, you don't normally turn around and go, you know, that guy up there, he's right. Normally, you're like, I'm going to protect you from that person. Even if you think that person might be even a little bit right, you're going to be ready to go cut off his head. You're going to defend. And so keep in mind that they're all listening to this. They're all hearing it. But I still am having a hard time with this. David protects Shammai because he sees the insults, the curses, as being permitted by God. Wait a minute. If David is a man after God's heart, and if David has done what God has called him to do, and he's doing what David has asked him to do, how on earth did we now find ourselves in this place? Where David himself goes, look, he's only doing that because the Lord told him to. And I'm sitting there going, no, David, he's not doing it because the Lord told him to. He's doing it because he's annoying. He's doing it because he doesn't know that God was the one that was behind the deaths of everybody of Saul. And God's the one that decided that you, David, would be king. So how could you possibly say, hey, listen up, I got this great thing. David, hey, you know, he's doing it because God told him to. Well, no. In fact, if you ever really want to rile my feathers, start talking bad about the church of God. You'll get me there. It has its problems. But I'm not going to sit there and go, you know what? The reason why you're mouthing off about God is because God told you to. I'm probably going to say, maybe you should go listen to God a little harder. And if God is telling you to come bring that message to the church, ask him how he wants you to do it. But David doesn't send anybody even over to do that. I want to make sure we don't think that David's inaction is apathetic. David's doing what he feels God wants him to do. And even more so, David is going to completely trust God. I want to make sure we understand this here. Because when David says, look, he's doing what God told him to, and maybe these curses will become blessings one day in the future. He's going to say that too. But this is a sign that he trusts 100% in God. How else could you sit there and listen to somebody for hours on end talk about you as a murderer, a scoundrel, throw rocks at you, throw dirt at you, and I don't know whether or not he was all hot and sweaty, but could you imagine if somebody was throwing dirt at you and you're all hot and sweaty now? What do you have? You ever been outside in the middle of summer and then a dust storm comes through? If God is behind these events, whether it be Absalom, whether it be Shimei, whatever's going on this journey, David sees it as God's doing and that he has no pathway to move forward. In other words, if God is the one who's behind Shimei being up there throwing rocks and doing all of these crazy things, David doesn't see how he can possibly fight it. Instead, he's going to trust that God will make it right. Now, there's one thing I want to kind of take a little issue with here. Throughout the whole story, there's one thing that's not there, and it's not that you ever see David say, I wonder if there are events in my own life that cause this. You never see David go, this is an interesting situation I find myself in. I wonder if I should have treated Amnon differently. If I should have punished him sooner. I wonder if I should have dealt with Absalom differently. I waited for a number of years to let him come back to Jerusalem. Then I waited 2 years to see him. And then I apparently wasn't really paying attention to what he was doing after that. He doesn't do any of that. He just says, look, God is one who's in charge. God is the one who is going to do what he's going to do. So David and his people arrive at the Jordan River, and they are absolutely exhausted. And by this time, I'm convinced they were emotionally drained. Everything taken out of them. I'm convinced that just the mere physical activity would have been enough to make anyone tired. I don't know how far again they had walked in a course of a day or maybe a couple of days, but it would have been physically demanding work, and even once they got some donkeys that would help them, it would still be a lot of work and a lot of people. The emotions that they are dealing with, they've left the capital city, they've left the comfort of being in the palace. We all want to be in a palace, right? We want to have servants. We want to have people who come and bring us food anytime we want. We want to sit up, be able to take a nap anytime we want. Well, some of you do that anyway. Now they find themselves in a position of, we don't know where we're going. All they know is that they've made it to the Jordan River, and now they can finally wash off all that dirt that's been being thrown off all over them. Apparently, they didn't cut off his head, but Shimei is either going to walk away or drown. I'm not really sure. They're not going to talk about him much anymore. Like I told you, next week we're going to talk a little more. But it's going to be about the two types of advice that Absalom's getting. Will David make it back to the kingdom? That's really the question. And for those of you that don't know the end of the story, a couple more weeks. Which traits from David's character should modern-day Christians adopt? The first thing is that I think that we should adopt David's absolute belief that Yahweh is Lord. In case you think, oh, well, that was so simple. There's a word I want you to pay really close attention to. Absolute. Unquestioning. David isn't sort of going, well, maybe my God is bigger than whatever is in front of me. Maybe my God is more powerful than Shimei, who's been hurling insults at us. He is saying, God is God. God is sovereign. If God is allowing Shimei to do this or telling Shimei to do this, my only action is to trust and believe in him. That's it. I think one of the most difficult aspects has to be just David's willingness to endure this whole situation. Because I assure you that while there might not have been small talk about what might happen if we got back to the palace, that at some point, some of the people, maybe even toward the back of the line, were going, when is David going to shut that guy up? He's got the whole guard up there. Hey, we could handle this real simply. Send a soldier up there and by the way, a lot of them probably were saying something like, well, that's what I would have done. He's crazy, but this is what I would do. But David seems so incredibly convinced. At least he's really open to this idea that all of this that's happening to him may have come directly from God. And if it's come from God, David gets no say. And here's kind of the impression I get. David doesn't have clarity of saying, all right, you should just go shut that man up. So David's like, we just got to walk until God says something. And by the way, God is powerful enough that if God wants that man to be shut up, he will shut the man up. Do you not remember some stories like where some boys call a prophet bald, and so the prophet's able to call out bears to maul the boys? True story, it's in the Bible. You guys are looking at me like I'm crazy. So if God wants to send some bears, even if there aren't even bears in that area, guess what could happen? I'm convinced that God could have sent lightning bolts. I'm convinced that God could have spoken in an audible voice and said, David, just take care of him. End him. But David's like, there's nothing I can do. If everything is about God and is subject to God's decisions, David is really powerless to do anything here. Can you see that? And that's what David sees with his absolute belief in God. What he's saying is no matter what happens over here or what happens over there, God is either going to protect me or God's going to allow that. And my job is to continue to go forward and let all of that stuff just be handled by God. Because he is God. So, the wonderful thing about our life is that you and I basically have the same attitude, right? That when bad things come our way, whether it be a flat tire or gas prices, that we just go, praise God, he's still in control. I'm going to take by your silence that most of you understand what I'm saying. So we're not good at this. There's a passage in Romans that we try to skip over as often as possible. Bless those that persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Let's just move on. We don't want to talk about that. When was the last time you were under attack? For some of you, you're like, what do you mean? I am currently under attack. It may not be some guy walking alongside me shouting, but it might as well be. It's just as draining emotionally and physically. But when was the last time that you felt like you were doing what God wanted and somebody was right there to get you? When that happened, or if it's happening now, was or is God still God? When you are at your absolute worst and you cannot tell which way is even or what, do you realize that in those moments God is still God? Because that's what David is doing in this passage. He's looking around and he's going, while I am pressed from all directions, the character that's going to come out of me is that God, this absolute belief that God is still God. He's Lord. He's Lord over my life. He's Lord over Shimei's life. He's Lord over everybody I'm with's life. So, when we're in that situation, we do this. We say, praise God, I'm being persecuted. How exciting. God is still God. And if God's going to allow that, I'm going to sit back and one day I'll be free from whatever it was. Brings me to my second thing. Modern day Christians should adopt David's absolute trust that Yahweh or God is able. So the first step is God, right? Easy enough. The second step is that God is able. If you want to really get down to what David is doing here, what David is saying is that because of who I am and because of my walk with God, being a man after God's own heart, having seen over and over and over again how God works, that when the pressure is really on, I believe that God is still God and that God is able, and I'm going to have absolute trust that He's going to do it. We would never have trust issues, I'm sure of that. But David, for every one of his flaws, in the end ultimately believes, and by the way, trusts completely that God will carry out His promise. Now, mind you, he still sends people back to be spies. He's not just sitting there going, well, I'm just going to sit here and see what God might do. In the case of Shimei, he's like, just let him talk. You know, do that 3-year-old thing where you put your fingers in your ears and go la, 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 la while he's speaking and just keep moving. Because God is still God and we're going to trust He's going to do what He wants. David ultimately has hope. Not that God will curse Shimei, but that God will take the present situation, which feels very much like a curse, and turn it into a covenant blessing. That's the word he uses. That would be returned. And David basically is saying, God might be working through Shimei to show me just how bad things are, but then ultimately is going to show me how good things were. God has an ultimate purpose. Now here's the thing, when you and when I begin to want to curse others, I say begin to want to because I'm sure you would never actually do it, right? But when we find ourselves in the situation where we want to do it, see if you can find that slide for me. But when we get to the point where we want to do it, how do we find our way? How do we just simply trust that God has a plan, that God is going to make the plan work, that God is going to do what God does best, which is to be God and be in control and allow us to simply trust in Him? When are we going to be able to do it? You and I can be absolutely confident that no matter what it is that you're facing right now, that if you have both faith in God and you can trust in His abilities, that you are going to get through it, and on the other side, you're going to be way better off. That was kind of weak, but okay. Amen. You see, what I'm trying to tell you, so no matter what's going on in your life, God is God, and you can trust something better. If you want to trust you or you want to trust me, well, you're putting your hands into the wrong person. I don't know all of you all that well, but I know me really well. And while I sometimes think I have a really great idea, when it really comes down to it, because I can tell you, if Abishai asked me, do you want me to shut that man up over there? I pretty much would have turned and said, please. I'm kind of tired of the rocks and the dirt. Or, maybe don't chop off his head, but, like push him over the other side of the hill. Take off a leg or something. My guess is that you are saying that you might feel similarly. I'm just telling you that I think if we're honest with one another, that's how we feel. So I don't know where you're at today. Do you feel cursed or do you feel blessed? It's good to be blessed in church. But my question for you is this. Whether you're in a time right now where it's obvious God is just blessing you right and left. My guess is there's people who are here listening to me who, you know what? Right now is a wonderful time in my life. But I'm also convinced there's people listening who are going, you know what? I'm struggling. This is one of the worst times, and I'm not sure what to do. And here's my answer to both of you. Absolute belief that God is God. And absolute trust that God is able. Fair enough? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity it is to gather together, to hear your word, to consider how we might become more like you. Lord, I don't know about anybody else, but I can speak for myself in saying that there are times when I feel absolutely like I'm being persecuted, like I'm having to walk a long ways with people throwing dirt or hurling insults. And while that might just be figuratively, help me to always remember that if I have an absolute belief that you are always God and will never fail us, then it would be so easy to remember that you are able to be trusted to do what you will do. So Lord, the next time I find myself in the midst of feeling that way, I just ask that I'd be reminded of David and that I would just simply have that kind of belief, that kind of faith, and that I would be able to trust even in the moment in which everything seems to be coming crashing down. Lord, we love you. We've gathered to worship and to learn and to become more like you. And we simply ask that you would continue to guide us, direct us, each and every step of the way. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks for watching this message with me. If you want to see more, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the little bell to be notified when we go live or post a new video. We'd also like to invite you to join us in person for a service. Visit us at desertgrace.org or give us a call at 928-305-1132 for more information.